Now we're going.
I'll keep an eye on the traffic.
All right. Well, thanks for coming today. My name's Leonard, and I lived in Lyon Mountain for about 11 years.
Oh.
Up on top of the hill here. Taught school in Northern Adirondack in the 70s. Got a couple of my students here today, which is nice. And I want to thank Anna and Anne-Marie and the board for inviting me here today to do this. And I'm kind of ashamed to say that I've never been in here before.
You were here yesterday.
What a fantastic job you've done here preserving the history of this town and the people in it. It's just all done so tastefully. I was going to light the cigar for that guy sitting at the desk yesterday. So weird.
That's Mr. Lange.
Yeah, Mr. Lange, remember Mr. Lange?
So it's a real tribute to all of you that have been involved in that and to the town, because there's a rich history here, as evidence in all the pictures and the stories that are here. So I'll get to my story. When I was a young man, a long time ago, my father used to tell me some stories about his experiences in World War II. And I always thought it would be a good book. So, years and decades go by, and in 1995, when he turned 75, I decided, well, if we're going to write a book, we better get started. So I didn't know anything about writing a book, which has kind of been the story of my life. I just decided to do something and then figure it out as I go along. So I decided to make tapes, interview him and make tapes. So I bought a tape recorder, and he would come up here and stay, and a fair amount of the taping was done in Lake Placid. I had some friends up here. This is a house in Lake Placid that they own, 360 acres right outside of town. So I got to know them, and when I told them, whenever, if you ever go away, and they were involved in different things, I'd be glad to look after your house. So I got to know them that way, and then my father would come up, and so that's actually where the story is set. But a lot of it was done right here in Lyon Mountain. In fact, Lyon Mountain is described in the first page of the book. So he would come up, and he was a Scottish. First couple times he came up and I was taping him, I kind of felt a little uncomfortable, So I went and got a bottle of scotch, and the stories got a little better. So that's how the title eventually, we got the title, The Whiskey Bottle Conversation. So over a period of 4 years, we worked on it. We had different scenarios, tried different scenarios, different titles. I sent out, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of pages to publishers. I just got a book, like the New York City phone book on publishers in the country, and started going through it looking for somebody who might, have something or be interested in that type of story. So the ones that responded said, you need to get an agent. Things have changed since then with the digital age. They can print books in like minutes now. But back then there were a few big publishers, and what I found was if you're an unpublished author, they don't want to know anything. I'd walk around the bookstores after we got this done, experiences in the war, and they wouldn't even want to look at it. So we got an agent down in Pennsylvania, and that was another scam job. They want $1,500 to do this editing, and so I give them the manuscript, and it comes back with a little notation here, a little notation there, and but when we went down and talked to this agent, one thing she said was, she says, you need to learn how to write descriptively. You need to create pictures for people because they don't know, really where you are, what you're talking about. So she gave me this book to read called Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which was about a southern Charlottesville or Savannah, Georgia. There was a murder, and I think they made a movie out of it. But anyways, I read 3 chapters of that, and that was enough. So towards coming into the 4th year, I was just kind of fed up with everything, and so I decided to rewrite the whole story from scratch. And she also suggested that we write it in the first person, in a conversation form, a father talking to his son, telling his experiences. So I wasn't working during the winter, so every morning I'd get up, my father came up and stay, and I had a legal pad, and I'd start writing. I think my best day was 36 pages. I don't know if you've ever seen authors or writers interviewed, but they pretty much all say once you start writing, it's like something takes you over. And that's what kind of happened. I get up, I have a knot in my stomach, going, oh, geez, what am I going to write today? And then I sit down and start writing, and it's like you can't stop yourself almost. So then I would take them down to my girlfriend, Marty Martin, and she would put them on the computer, and we would print it out and read and do light editing on that, and then I go back and write some more, and so that's how we came up with the final book. And this is what I wrote, all by hand. So it's quite an undertaking. So then, so we couldn't find a publisher. So we decided, well actually my father had a friend who had a printing business down in Binghamton, New York. And unbeknownst to my father, I contacted this fellow and told him what we had done, and we had it on disc now, so he said, well, send me down the disc and we'll put it together for you. I'll have my wife lay it out and put it together. So we had 200 books printed up, and for my father's 78th or 9th birthday, we had a family gathering in a restaurant. A lot of his relatives, sister, brother, nieces, and nephews. So there was quite a crowd there. So we had our dinner, and we gave him a nice chair. And he didn't know anything about the book. So I brought out the boxes of books, and I gave him one. And he was pretty overwhelmed about it. I was too. It's like, I guess like having a kid. Put all that time and effort into it. So we had a book signing for the family, and then we did one in Lake Placid. Let's say called "Closing the Generation Gap, One Book at a Time." That was in 1999. And then we did one in Watertown, and then my father died a year later. So I kept one book, and I just had really had enough of it. It cost a lot of money and a lot of time, and of course are disappointed when you can't find a publisher. So I kept one book. It sat in my bookcase for 16 years, and I thought about over that time maybe revisiting it. So I was just telling Bill a little while ago, I was going to Malone and I heard an advertisement for a publisher out of Staten Island. They call them indie publishers. They're smaller, they'll take unpublished authors and work with them, and of course you pay a fee for it. But they do the editing, they do the cover. I did my own cover. It's a full color copy. I didn't have any pictures in the first book. There's 20-some in here. So that took a year to do that. What they do is I gave them a manuscript. Well, they go through and number every line on the manuscript. There's 7,600 and some lines. Then they send it back to me to read and make sure everything was there. And having read the book, after 16 years before I set it down, I realized it was, especially the first 3 or 4 chapters, it was pretty rough. I was learning how to write, I guess. So I did my own editing of that, and you have to put it on a graph, and you have to take the line, put the line number down, you have to put the 2 words before what you're going to change the words, and then put the 2 words after it. So that was 6 pages right there. I had a young man from Northern Adirondack doing my computer work for me. So then I send it back to them, then they make those revisions, then they send it back to me, I got to reread it again, then I send it back to them, and then they do their editing, then they send it back to me. So I over the year I read it like 5 or 6 times. So then they do the barcoding, they copyright it for you, they put it on Amazon, Google, Barnes & Noble, all those different sites. Which sounds kind of, impressive, but, Amazon has 1 million books on it. When I first went on site there, I went on Amazon, and they give you your sales rankings and where you are and the books they carry. I was 416,000. So, I got a ways to go. But doing the research I've done, something that's a little disheartening for people like me who are, unknown authors, or is that 95% of all books sold are bestsellers. And those are the books that, are written by Hillary Clinton, and they get all the publicity. Yeah. So you got apparently around 2 million authors in the United States. So you take 5% of that, so it's quite a daunting task, really. You have to get exposure. I've been doing book signings, and you get some there, but the first time around I really had high expectations, about the book was going to do great. It's such an interesting story. And this time around, I really don't have any expectations. My goal is to speak to groups like this and talk about that time in our country's history, and get it out like that. I have some other ideas about trying to get some higher recognition, but I haven't figured out how to use my Windows on the computer yet, so I'm not quite there yet. So, okay, so this start with some pictures. My father was born in Lyon, Georgia in 1920. Okay, this is when he was 5 years old. My grandfather was here, graduated from Cornell in 1917 with a veterinarian degree.
Wow.
And my grandmother graduated from Ithaca College at the same time with an English degree. My grandfather, his father was a medical doctor who died at an early age. And so my grandfather was the oldest of 4 or 5 kids. So he had to go to work. He was born in Kentucky. He had to go to work in Virginia in the coal mines and support his family. Apparently he was quite a scholarly boy, but so when he got his brothers and sisters, put them all through college, and he went to college on his own. He wanted to be a medical doctor, but he couldn't afford it, so he was quite a stern man. I spent a lot of time with him as a boy, going on calls and helping him with his animals, and he'd always have a fit if I put my hands on the inside of his windshield. And my grandmother, they went to Millen, Georgia, and he got a job. First he was in the Army, and he was a veterinarian for cavalry horses. Teddy Roosevelt and that crew, the Rough Riders. And so then he went to Georgia. He got a job with the state of Georgia vaccinating pigs. And so they moved down there. That's where my father was born. And apparently things got a little tough, so he sent my grandmother and my father back to Ithaca, where my grandmother was from. Excuse me. Well, she was the first woman hired by the Ithaca Times newspaper in 1925 as a journalist. And they had her writing social events and tea parties, and she wanted to write hard news. So she kept writing stories and kept bugging the editor, and finally he let her write real news. So then she was also, during World War II, they moved to Mexico, New York. My grandfather had practiced there. She was in charge of all the rationing cards for Oswego County, which was quite a weighty job, really. They rationed gasoline and rubber and steel and food. And she was also the first woman ever elected mayor in Mexico, New York in 1955.
Wow.
So she was just a very elegant, soft-spoken woman, and nice, very nice lady. I spent a lot of time with her. So my grandfather and my father didn't get along at all. My father was always in fights and got kicked out of 2 or 3 schools, and my grandfather was on the Board of Education, and you know how that goes. So one time, this is my grandfather here with his car. Living in Mexico, as you know, they get the lake effect snow. So I guess my father was 11 or 12, something like that. So my grandfather got a call to go out, and a baby was turned in the wrong way inside the mother in the farm, and he had to go out and straighten it out. So he took my father with him, and so they go out there, bad snowstorm. They get the calf, my grandfather does what he does, and they get the calf out safely. But when they're coming home, the storm really got bad. So he told my father to put his head out the window and put his left hand on the steering wheel, and if they looked like they were going off the road. And my grandfather said, well, I'll put my hand on the the other side. So this is an excerpt from the book. My grandfather's name was Harsey King Leonard. Everybody called him HK. So HK told me to put my hand out the window and hold on to the steering wheel with my left hand. He had his head out the window with his right hand on the wheel. We did pretty well keeping the car on the road until about 6 or 7 miles from home, where the road took a sharp right. We went off in the ditch on my side. HK started yelling and cursing at me for neglecting my watch. I got out and shoveled and pushed until finally we got the car back on the road. The snow continued to blow and drift. Visibility was 0 at times. We drove a few more miles and went off in the ditch on my side. I got out and shoveled while HK swore and cursed at me. Then we managed to get out of the ditch. I opened the door to get in and he said, "You run in front of the car, Dick. We're not going in the ditch again. You run in front of the car." I slammed the door and began running. I could see the road in some places and not in others because of the driving, swirling snow. I ran all the way to Mexico, probably 4 miles. I fell a few times and stopped on occasion to catch my breath. Every time I stopped, HK would lay on the horn so I'd keep going. That big car right on my head. When we got home, I made it into the house and collapsed. Harriet, that's my grandmother, wanted to know what happened, so HK told her. She was furious. She held me up and into a hot bath. I soaked for a long time, then went to bed. HK didn't say a word to me the next day, not a word. So, the story takes you from 1920 through the end of World War II. And I kind of wanted to show how this boy grew up and the things he did, which, you know, made him into the young man that wanted to join the Air Force. And, you know, by the time he was 12 or 13, he bought 6 or 7 Model Ts, and he'd put them in the garage at the house and take them apart and fix them, and then he'd sell them. He said he never paid more than $14 for one. And then he went on to, you know, larger cars, and he went to work for a guy in Mexico at a gas station, working on cars, and then this fella bought an airplane, taught himself to fly, and then he took my father flying, and so it's, you know, he got kicked out of Mexico Academy for fighting. And my grandfather sent him to the manliest military academy. He got kicked out of there for fighting and telling the commandant he didn't know what the blank he was doing. And, before the war started, he and another fellow went to Canada before America was in the war to join the RCAF. They got kicked out of Canada. Because the other fellow's father was a banker, you know, and they didn't tell him they were gone. Well, he found out, and they came up and apparently made a big stink with the Canadian government. So the recruiter called him in and he says, "Well, boys," he says, "you got to get out of Canada. You know, Raymond, your father's up here making all kinds of trouble. I told your father that I'd let him know when after I spoke to you, but I didn't tell him how long after I spoke to you, so I'm giving you 24 hours to get out of the country." So they left the country and they went down to Vermont, where my father had an uncle, and he got him a job in a company that was building turrets, gun turrets. We weren't in the war yet, but probably for England. And they spent their time there until the war started. Now he was home visiting my mother This is my mother and my older brother Rick. This is my mother when she was a little Irish girl, and her brother Rick. Rick was killed in Germany about a month before Germany surrendered. So, my father was home in Mexico, and Roosevelt declared war on Japan and Germany. Well, there was a doctor who lived right next door to my grandparents' house, and when my father got up, went over to the doctor, got a physical, and drove to Syracuse. He said the line to sign up was probably 4 or 5 blocks long. And this was the day or a couple days after Roosevelt. I mean, these men and women, they wanted to fight and defend their country and the other countries that were being invaded. You know, that's what they thought about. They grew up in the Depression. They knew what hardship was. But they had a belief system, you know, a belief in this country and the ideals and principles that it stood for. So he joined the Army Air Corps. There was no Air Force at the time. It was part of the United States Army. And they sent him down to Tennessee on a train with a bunch of other guys, which was their basic training. And they had a few weeks off, and basically what they did in their basics was, it was a lot of testing, he said. You know, they wanted to see what your capacity was. And, I mean, a lot of guys wanted to be a pilot, but they didn't have the mathematical background, or they couldn't see, so they would make them maybe a gunner or a radio man or something like that. So there was a lot of that, and then there was a lot of course, the physical training. So then they sent him back home. That's when my mother and father got married. And he was home about a month before he got his orders. And he was told to report at Syracuse, and he was going to Bakersfield, California for flight training. So they went to Syracuse, dropped him off, and he met another fellow that was going to Bakersfield as well. So at Bakersfield, it was basic trainings, and the Stearman biplane was the plane that they trained in. These planes, as you probably know, are very good at acrobatics, very maneuverable. So there's two cockpits. The pilot trainer would be in the front cockpit, and the trainee would be in the back. Now the controls were hooked together, so when the pilot took it up and like he did a right-hand roll, the trainee was sitting in the back with his hand on the stick and his feet on the pedals, so he could feel what the guy was doing when he was doing it. It's actually a pretty good way to train somebody. So they would go through different maneuvers and different procedures, and shoot landings, which is you come in for a landing, hit the runway, give it the gas, and take off again. So it's book. After 9 weeks, we began our preliminary training, which was flying PT-17s. They were double-wing biplanes built for aerobatics. They had 2 seats, one behind the other, with open cockpits. There were connecting controls, which meant the instructor in the front was generally flying the plane. The trainee in the back had his hands on the stick and feet on the pedals, enabling him to feel what the instructor was doing and how the plane would react. It was terrific. My instructor was pilot was Captain Ballinger. He had flown stunts and exhibitions around the country before he had the Air Corps. Rumor had it he'd flown stunts in a few movies. The first time he took me up, I felt like I belonged there. I had flown with George, but this was different. I could really feel the plane and how it responded when he did different maneuvers. We communicated by speaking through a tube that ran from the front cockpit to the back. Every time we went up, he would do a maneuver like a slow bank to the right, or putting the plane into a dive. Then he'd let go of the controls and yell through the tube for me to do the same thing. My fourth time up, he told me to shoot a landing, which means coming in, landing the plane, and taking right off again. I circled the field, made an approach, and made a smooth landing before we pushed the throttle forward and took off again. What a thrill it was. So, now where are we? So then, after, I think it was 2 months or 3 months of schooling and training with this, then they went to this, which was called the PT-13. Much more, it had a double cockpit, a lot more power. So PT Phase 2 pilot training. The instructors were friendly but serious. They were very low-key in their approach. After about 5 hours of flight, takeoffs and landings, my instructor got out of the plane and told me to take her up and shoot a few landings, then go out in the practice area. I was thrilled. Once in the practice area, I pulled back on the stick, pulling the plane into a steep climb. When I got to the height where it stalled, I kicked the right rudder pedal, and the nose would drop down and I'd be in a slow spin. As the plane picked up speed, the spiral would tighten. When I got to about 1,000 feet, I kicked the left rudder pedal and would take the plane out of the spin. This is me. Did you ever get disoriented or dizzy when you were in a spin? I never did, but some of the boys couldn't pull the plane out of the spin and crashed. How many crashed while you were there, Dick? I'm not sure, but I would guess at least 10. Another time he was telling me it was the next plane up from this, where they had 50 caliber guns. I think it may be a B-26 on the wings. And they'd be out in the desert, practice. The B-26s were built as low altitude bombers who went in and fire their guns and strafe the targets and drop their bombs and get out. But he said when you're training, you're coming into a dive and those 50 calibers are going off, and he said it's like this greatest thrill. And he said some of the pilots got so engrossed they weren't paying attention to their altimeters, and into the ground they went. Okay, this is the B-26, called the Martin Marauder. It at the time was the world's fastest medium-range bomber. It had a top speed of cruising speed of about 360 miles an hour. It's just pretty slow by today's standards, but in a dive it could reach 400 or 500 miles an hour. My father really liked that plane. He said it was like a big fighter. It had a very short wingspan, which gave it much more maneuverability. But the problem was, you had to land at 160 miles an hour, which was extremely fast back then. Well, anyway, it says the B-26, or Martin Marauder, was the world's fastest medium-range bomber and was originally designed as a low-altitude bomber. It was built to fly in at 200 or 300 feet, straight to the target, drop the bombs, and get the hell out. Had two Pratt & Whitney R2800 double WWII engines. This gave the plane 3,700 horsepower and speeds of 325 miles an hour. Without a load, stripped down, it could push 400 to 500 miles an hour on a dive. The bomb's payload was 3,000 pounds. The service elevation was 25,000 feet with a range of 1,000 miles. It weighed 12 tons and had up to 12 50 caliber machine guns, 4 package guns on the fuselage, and 3 1,000-pound bombs. The first plane it produced demanded a lot of respect. Instructors told us there have been numerous crashes. 26 had the shortest wingspan of any bomber, and that meant your landing speed had to be at least 160 miles an hour, which is extremely fast. A fighter plane like a P-40, for example, has a landing speed of about 60 miles an hour. So when a 26 hit the ground at 160, it was really moving. If the plane's speed dropped below 160, it literally fell out of the sky. Consequently, a lot of pilots thought it was unsafe and were scared to death by the plane. I thought it was a joy to fly and handled like a big fighter. The pilots named them the flying prostitutes, no visible means of support. Okay, then from the B-26s, they went to B-17s and B-24s. This is a B-24. It's missing the top gun turret here. But it had, this plane was the most produced plane in history. They produced 18,600 of them. It was the most multi-engine plane ever produced. It had, I think it had 8 or 10 guns on it, 50 caliber machine guns. 1 or 2 in the nose, 1 on the top, a belly gunner, 2 side gunners, and a tail gunner. Now these 50 caliber machine guns could shoot 850 rounds per minute with the bullets traveling 3,000 feet per second. So if you got eight guns blazing on one plane, that's like 7,000 rounds per minute that they're pushing out. Look like they're happy, don't they? Okay, this is the turret gunner. My father said I wouldn't want to be one of those guys. They couldn't be any more than 5 feet 4 inches tall. They got in from the top or in from the back here. And the early B-17s and B-24s, they didn't retract. So when they took off, they're down there like that. They couldn't wear parachutes because there wasn't enough room. This is the way they sat in there. Legs up, machine guns. Now can you imagine 4, 5, 6 hours like that? So it says, the Sperry ball turret was very small in order to reduce drag and was typically operated by the smallest crew member, no more than 5'5". To enter the turret was moved until the guns were pointed down. The gunner put his feet in the heel rest and occupied this cramped situation. He would put on a safety strap and close and lock the turret door. There was no room for a parachute, which was left in the cabin above the turret. There were 2 small 50 caliber guns. Now this is a poem written by Randall Jarrell, Death of the Ball Turret Gunner. From my mother's sleep I fell into the state, and I hunched in this I hunched in its belly till my wet fur froze. 6 miles from the earth, loose from the dream of life, I woke to black flak and the nightmare of fighters. When I died, they washed me out of the turret with a hose. Okay, now where are we? Okay. Once my father got through his training, B-26s and 27, they sent him to Biggs Field in Texas. Now, Biggs Field, there was 400 B-24s, 200 B-17s, and 50 B-26s. Now, his responsibility was maintenance operations officer, and they would tow targets. The B-26s would tow targets so the gunners in the 24s and 17s could practice. What they do is they would get in a formation of 400 or 500 planes, fly up and around, and they'd make bombing runs on Phoenix, Arizona. What my father would do is he'd get in his 26 with an engineer. They let out 2,500 feet of cable, which had a big target on the end of it. Well, he would fly over the top of the plane so the top gunners could shoot. He'd go underneath and the sides. And this was some of the crew that worked with him, keeping the planes going up. And you look at some of these faces, and these guys are, you know, in their early 20s, and they look like they're 50. So I asked him, I said, did you guys ever get hit in your plane? He said, he laughed and said, oh, every once in a while we'd have a few holes in the plane where the boys got a little crazy. So this is the cockpit of a B-24. I don't know how they could look out the window, to be honest, the front windows, you know. I'd want to see the ground if I would land in one of these things myself, but yeah. And the nose gunner and the bombardier crawled down through here into the front of the nose of the plane. Wow. Now last summer they had a B-17 at Plattsburgh Air Force Base. And I went and saw it, and you know, after going through this and studying and researching this and seeing all the pictures and listening to him, those planes were a flying coffin, you know. I mean, you think of them as being big, well, they aren't that big, especially the fuselage. So you got the people down on the nose, there's no way they're getting out. You got the pilot and the co-pilot right behind him as the guy standing right behind him with a little turret over his head with machine guns shooting here. And then the bombs are right behind that with a walkway about this wide over the open bomb bay door. And then you have a radio operator, an engineer, then you have the 2 side gunners and a tail gunner. I mean, the tail gunner, where's he going? So, you know, maybe the side guys could get out, but there's no way you were getting out of that plane. Okay. So, when he was at Biggs Field, he was chosen to go to California, and this is a B-26, there's machine guns on the wings. They took the machine guns out, put cameras in there. So this was his buddy Gus, they were going to California to fly mock attack missions on Patton's tank crews in the California desert. Now the tanks had guns in their turrets, so they would fly in make their runs on the tanks, you know, shooting at them with their cameras. The tanks would be swirling around trying to shoot at them, and then at night they would go in and review the pictures to try and give them a little better idea, you know, how to improve their you know, shooting capability. So this is an excerpt from the book about that. One afternoon I got word to report to Bob Border's office. Bob told me he had received orders to send 2 pilots and B-26s to Blythe Air Force Base in California. They wanted the 2 planes equipped with cameras to fly air-to-ground missions for General Patton's tank group training in the desert. He said, if you want, you and Gus get your planes fitted and fly up to Blythe, operations will fill you in on the rest. The next day I had our planes fitted with cameras in the wings. Gus was happy as hell to be going along. Gus and I landed and reported to Captain Wilson. He explained that there are 500 tanks in the desert on maneuvers. We would be given patterns to fly and attack procedures to follow. Each day Gus and I would fly our mountain attack combat missions on the tank group. Each day, usually in the morning, we were given our instructions. We'd fly out in the desert, make low-level passes around 300 feet across the tanks, shooting with our cameras. Sometimes we'd come in behind them, and sometimes we'd come in front of them. The tanks had cameras in their guns, too. They were trying to defend themselves, swinging their big guns around, twisting and turning, trying to shoot at us. It was great fun. I don't think they were hitting us too well. When we finished making our runs, Gus and I would get in formation and fly up the coast and meet these P-38s, which were twin-tail, twin-engine fighters. They were patrolling the coastline. Of course, they knew who we were just by vision. We'd spend an hour or so having dogfights. Being outnumbered 5-to-1, they would dive on us, trying to give us a little scare. We weren't supposed to be doing that, but you got to have some fun, Dick said with a smile. So he was, you know, I asked him, I said, well, what did you do when you weren't flying? He says, we had no orders. So Bob and I would fill our planes up and we'd fly up to Lake Tahoe, you know, make bombing runs on them, or we'd fly down into the Grand Canyon, and, you know, they just did whatever they wanted to do. But he said when they wanted them to fly on the tank cruise, then they were there. Okay. So another time, while he was at Biggsfield, there was the WWII, which was the Women's Air Force. There were different bases around the country that trained women to be pilots. Well, somebody decided they were going to close all those bases. Excuse me. So Dick was chosen as a congressman coming from Washington. His name was Congressman Costello. And Dick was chosen to take him and fly him around the country, and he would speak to all the women at these bases and explain why the bases were being closed. So he took Congressman Costello, and he said he was gone probably a month, and they landed at these bases, and the women pilots would give demonstrations, and then, you know, they would explain that they were closing the bases and why, and so forth. Well, all this time, his main goal was to see combat. He wanted to see combat, you know, the thrill of war, the adventure, that whole scenario. So when he got back to Biggsfield after being in California, he put in for a transfer. He wanted to see combat. Well, his commanding officer thought he was crazy. You know, he says, you're about to make captain. You can stay right here and train pilots. And he says, no. He says, I want to see combat. So a week later, he was sent to California. to a base there, which was a transition base. So there's probably 4,000 or 5,000 men there. And then he was about a week and a half there, and they put him on a ship. He had no idea where he was going. He was on the ship 52 days, and the first stop was in Tasmania, which is the deepest natural harbor in the world. So they stopped there and had a little R&R, then they went to India. They spent some time in India. From there, they got on a train, which he said was basically trolley cars. Probably 1,000 men on it, you know. The bathroom was a hole in the floor, and so they went 1,000 miles into China. So he ended up in China. Now, this fellow here is General Claire Chennault. He served between after the First World War. You know, planes were in their infancy then. You know, and these biplanes, when they dropped bombs, the guy in the back was leaning out with a bomb in his hand and dropped it over the side. So Chennault felt that the future of warfare was from the air. So he started training pilots on fighter tactics, and he put together a group that they weren't called the Blue Angels then, but it was the same type of thing. They'd travel around the country and do stunt flying and so forth. Well, the infantry generals didn't want to hear that, so he got disillusioned with the Army, and he was a captain at the time. He retired. Well, apparently he was kind of a sickly man. He was in the hospital at one point, and one of his friends came. This is before we were in the war. Came to him and told him that Japan had invaded China, and what a role that was going to play in the war. And the Chinese didn't have any real communication systems, and they were struggling. So Chennault gets out of his hospital bed and goes to Washington and tells some of his friends he's going to China on his own as a civilian to survey the situation. So, he left the hospital and went to Washington to meet some of his friends. He told them he was going to China on his own to survey the situation. Once he found out what was going on, he was counting on them for his help. After arriving in China, he began pinpointing all the places where the Japanese were fighting. He gradually got to know Chiang Kai-shek, who was the premier of China. Chan's wife took to him. So she arranged for him to meet some Chinese generals in various parts of the country. Chennault gradually put together his own assessment of the war, and after a year was given permission to set up a base in Kunming. Chennault, the civilian, returned to the United States and arranged for the sale of P-40 fighter planes to China. He also contacted the pilots of the Blue Angels and others he had flown with in the Air Corps. He returned to China with a ragtag group of 112 pilots. Chennault and his boys were mercenaries paid by the Chinese government. They received between $600 and $700 per month plus a $500 bonus for every plane they shot down. They all had bogus passports which listed them as salesmen, teachers, tourists, musicians, bankers, and baseball players. Their planes had the chilling eyes and jagged teeth of a shark on the nose. Hence they became known as the Flying Tigers. They had to brave overwhelming numbers of Japanese planes, including Zeros that could turn and climb twice as fast as a P-40. In February 1942, the Japanese dispatched 166 planes to bomb and strafe Rangoon. The Tigers met the attack with 9 P-40s and downed 24 Japanese fighters, losing only 3 of their own. The next day, the Japanese sent 200 planes back to Rangoon. This time, 18 enemy planes were taken down, and all 6 Tigers returned to the base safely. The American newspapers started reporting on their success and got so much press that the Army made Chenault a Major General. So, this is a picture of the planes and the flying Tigers. You see the shark's teeth in the eyes? Well, they did that for a psychological effect. When you're in a dogfight, you're chasing the other plane or you're diving on them. Now, if you see a plane diving on you with those teeth and eyes, it's probably going to distract your attention a little bit. So that was the whole idea of that. During the war, the Flying Tigers were credited with shooting down 1,200 Japanese planes with a possible 750 more, and they lost 500 of them. Okay, here's a picture of, you think of how high-tech everything is today. You see here in the back, that's an old plane. They're robbing parts off it to put on this plane to get it back in the air. Okay, so that's where my father was sent, to Kunming Base, where Chenault was with the Flying Tigers, and he was the operations officer there. Now, Kunming, what they were doing is they were building runways because now that the United States was in the war and they formed the United States China Air Command or something like that. They were shipping all these war materials to India, and from India they were flying them over the Himalayas into China, and they were being stockpiled there at Kunming. So the Americans were still guests of the Chinese government. So the Chinese were supposed to be doing all the work building these runways. The Americans were there to supervise and lay them out. Well, these runways for the C-5s and B-24s were 10,000 feet long. So, okay. We had to sign documents saying we were guests of the Chinese government. The Chinese were supposed to be building the runway. They had a Chinese station masters like the superintendent and several thousand Chinese laborers. The laborers would break rocks into small stones with hammers and then haul them to the runway in little carts pulled by a horse or a donkey, or some would carry the stones in baskets on their heads. It was really archaic. They would pile the stones and another group of laborers would shovel or push them around with boards. You see the boards here? That's how the level of the runway. So, okay. One afternoon, an engineering officer came to me and asked if I wanted to help him. I said, sure, what do you want me to do? He said, after the Chinese go home, meet me on the runway. That evening, I met the engineer, and he had 3 bulldozers and another enlisted man with him. We got on the dozers and started leveling off the stones that the Chinese had piled up during the day. We worked late in the night, leveled about 200 feet of runway. The next night we did the same thing. When the Chinese came back the next morning, all the rocks they had piled would be leveled off. After the 3rd night, we had finished about 500 feet of runway, and Chenault found out what we were doing. He called me into his office and chewed me out. He said, we are guests of the Chinese government, Lieutenant. It's their job to build that runway, not the Americans. I don't want to hear any more about bulldozers out there again. Do we understand each other, Lieutenant? I saluted and said, yes, sir. A couple of weeks later, when he was in the hospital or off another base, we got the bulldozers out again and started making some more runway. When he returned, the station master would go to him and complain. Chenault would call me in and give me hell. After the third time, he called me in and he says, you're runway happy, Leonard. You want to build runways? I'll send you to build some runways. He sent them to northern China. To turn a fighter strip into a B-24 strip with a bunch of CVs and a doctor. One time he was telling me they had when he went up north there, the CVs were the guys who did all the building and they did bridges and they had planes where they went and rescued people and engineers. So he had a bunch of CVs, dump trucks, bulldozers, and they've been working pretty hard, and so they were going to have a party. So he had the doctor ordered, I don't know, how many gallons of grain alcohol, and ordered all this fruit cocktail. So they mixed it all together and let it sit, for a day or so, and they had a party, and everybody was drinking the juice, and nobody seemed to be getting a buzz. So there was one guy sitting over somewhere who could barely talk or walk. Well, he'd been eating all the fruit. Well, the grain alcohol got absorbed into the fruit. So they started eating all the fruit. He said they were having races up and down the runway with bulldozers and dump trucks. So after doing that, he went to another base, which was a B-24 base in China, and wanted to join them. So they said they didn't know, but about a week later, a B-24 flew in and to the base he'd been working on. He says, all right, come on, Lieutenant, you're going with us. We all cleared. So this was a low altitude bomber group. They dropped their bombs at 300 feet above, mostly in the ocean over enemy ships. At this point they were mining the Yangtze River, so they just dropped these mines all of the bombs. But they were, after a little time with them, everything was moving towards Okinawa. So they were the last plane out of China, last B-24 out of China. They had a 1.5 ton overload on them because they wanted to take everything they could take. So when they're taking off, my father was a co-pilot, this other guy, Irish guy, Joe O'Connor. He says, all right, Dick, put the brakes on. Hold them on, and put the engines up as fast as they go. He said, all right, let the brakes off. And he said, they'll lumber down the runway. And they made one hop, back down again, another hop. And now the end of the runway's coming up, and Joe says, all right, he says, we got one more shot. Pull the landing gear when we make this last hop. Well, they made it up and just they made it up in the air. So they're flying to the Philippines. About halfway to the Philippines, they realize they're running out of gas because they got so much weight on the plane, so they're throwing stuff out of the plane, and they aren't going to make it. So they find a little island that's got a fighter strip on it, and they radio down, we got to land. They said, well, you can't land here, it's a fighter strip, you don't have enough runway. So they said, well, we haven't got any choice. So they went in, landed, hit the brakes, blew the tires, and just skidded to a stop before they skidded just before they hit the end of the runway. So they sent the rest of the crew to another plane, and Joe and Dick stayed back. They got the tires fixed and went to the Philippines. And then they hopscotched across the islands as the Marines would take them, Iwo Jima, Saipan, and they would go in, land their bombers. They would fly out into the ocean at night and look for ships to bomb, Japanese ships. So that took a while, and then they were the first bomber group to land on Okinawa. radar was in its infancy back then. So these low altitude bombers, they were primarily the ones equipped with radar. So at the height of it, I guess there was 500 or 600 planes on Okinawa. One point a typhoon came. So, and plus they have a big harbor there. Admiral Nimitz was there with all the ships there preparing for the invasion. Well, this typhoon comes, which is another word for hurricane. So they told all the pilots to get in their planes, and whichever way the wind was blowing, they'd face their planes into the wind on the ground with their motors running, brakes on. So, you know, they'd feel it move and they'd have to spin around. And so some of the planes, they didn't get it right, they flipped over. So he was a standby pilot, always flew at night and with different crews. He said he flew sometimes 3 to 4 times a week. They would fly up into the inland China Sea, which separates China and Japan. They would send back weather reports. The B-29s were bombing Japan. They didn't call it napalm back then, incendiary bombs, bombing everything. He said I'd fly up there at night. Sometimes I go in low. He said everything was burning. Everything was burning. So once they got their weather reports in, they'd look for a Japanese ship. So they'd find one. And he said he'd be like at 10,000 feet. They'd put the plane into a slow dive down to 300 feet. Once it got 300 feet, the bombardier would take over the plane. He was in the nose of the plane. They'd make a run on the ship. Of course, the ship's shooting it down. They're shooting at the ship. They drop their bombs, pull up, and they were impact bombs, 900-pound impact bombs. So this one time they were up looking for a ship, 10,000 feet, he said, and he sees this fireball coming at the plane. And he thought, well, this is it. I don't know what the size of those guns are on the ships, but probably a shell like that. So, you see, this is the cockpit of the B-24. That shell came in underneath his seat, underneath the legs of the co-pilot, and out the other side. I said, where'd the co-pilot say? He said, he didn't say anything. I said, what did you say? He said, I didn't say anything. He said, I know there's a lot of air rushing through there, though. Plus, they were shooting at him while the ship was shooting at him. They killed the bombardier and hit somebody in the back. So my father radios back on, you know, he didn't know the crew, so he wanted to know if anybody knew how to run the bomb sights. So one of the engineers said, yeah, I can do it. He said, all right, come on up, we're going to make a run on that ship. So they circle around and, you know, the ship's shooting at them and they make the run on the ship. And another guy was killed in the plane. I think they shot the radio out. So they take off and they're heading back to Okinawa. Well, there's a certain point where the Americans control the ocean. It's called the blind bombing zone. Well, you have 2 radios in a B-24. One is for communication to other planes, and another is what they call IFF, which is information friend or foe. So when you get back into the blind bombing zone, you got to send down your code to let them know that you are an American plane. Well, the IFF had been shot out, so now the Americans are shooting at the plane, and they shot 2 of the engines out. There's a twin tail on these planes. Shot one of the top part of the tail off. I think they hit another man. so finally they got into some cloud cover and they got up where they couldn't see him. And they all of a sudden they get a radio call from a CB plane that said they've been out looking for him, and so they told there's still 2 hours to go to get back to Okinawa. So they told him what their condition was, and so they said, you know, we'll follow you. If you got a ditch in the ocean, we'll come in and get you. So when they dropped their bombs, one of the bombs didn't come out. It was hung up in the cradle. So my father, one of the guys on the plane went up and told my father, and he went back and tried to chop it out of the cradle with an axe or some type of axe or something. So the open bomb bay doors were there. He said it wouldn't come out. So they make it back to Okinawa, and they go in to start their approach. Co-pilot puts the landing gear down, but only one wheel goes down. So he says, well, you know, pull it back up. You're better off the belly end than going on one wheel. So he tries to pull it up, it won't go back up. So he says, well, you know, we're going in. And he told the guys that were left to secure themselves the best they could. Well, they landed on that one wheel. And he said, I held it up for as long as I could and then started sliding down the runway. So I asked him how far did you slide? He said, probably 3,000 to 4,000 feet. And it dragged 2 men out of the bottom of the plane. So they finally stopped, and he gets out and goes back and is trying to help the guys, you know, on the runway with their, skins torn off them. So the ambulances come, and he gets in the ambulance with him and goes to the med tent, and he's holding one of the guys down while they're working on him. So after a while, the doctor says, though, he says, Lieutenant, he says, why don't you just take off and get some rest? So as he's walking out of the tent, I don't know whether it was a fighter plane or another B-24 came in. Something happened, it skidded off, hit my father's plane, that bomb went off and killed 17 more men. So I said, what did you do? He said, well, I got a Jeep, and he said, I got a bottle of whiskey, and I went up to my favorite spot on this hill overlooking the ocean, and woke up in the morning. I said, did that make you want to stop flying? He said, no. He said, that was my job. He said, 2 days later, I went up again. So finally, they dropped the nukes, and the war is over. So you got, he said, probably 1,000 ships in the harbor of Okinawa. So once Japan surrendered, they started shooting off all this ordnance in the sky to celebrate. He said, well, that killed about 50 guys on Okinawa from the stuff falling. He says, of course, they never told the parents that, they were killed in action. But they call it the $1 million blunder, because that's how much ammunition they figured they shot out. So after the war, he decided to stay on, because he wanted to go to Japan, and he said, I wanted to see what we fought for. So his role was basically fly mail around different locations and transport people. He went into Japan and took a train into Tokyo. He said that you go along the train and there's nothing left of the town, so it just burnt to the ground. He says, Tokyo, there was one building left standing, that was the Hyatt Regency Hotel. He said the whole city was underground. They had shops and all kinds of facilities underground. And he said they didn't bomb the Emperor's Palace. He said, but the Japanese, if they were in a mile of the Emperor's Palace, they would bow. And they didn't bomb the Olympic Stadium. That they had Olympics prior to the war there in Japan. He said they were mostly using that for people just to grow food and try and survive it. He said the Japanese people love MacArthur. You know, MacArthur went over to rebuild the country. He says, because, I said, why? And he said, well, because the everyday person was so sick of the generals and the politicians that got them into this war, and you know, they're the ones that, you know, it's always the civilians that suffer. So he said every day MacArthur would come out on the balcony of the Hyatt Regency. He said there'd be 20,000, 30,000 Japanese waiting to see him. And he says we used to have baseball games, you know, in the Olympic Stadium with the Americans against the Japanese. So finally they were running out of things for him to do, and he decided to come home. And through all of this, you know, this discussion, I'm just marveled at his memory and the detail of everything that he did. So he said, well, I decided to go home. I says, how'd you get home? He says, you know, I don't know. I don't know going by ship or by plane or how I got there. He says, I have no recollection of that at all. So he ended up in California and got his mustarding out pay, and so they took a train back east, a slow train. He said you would think that it would be very exciting to be going home and seeing your family, and he says, well, it wasn't for me. He said, I was very confused. You know, I'd been on this 4 years. He'd seen my mother and my brother for 4 months. So he said, you know, I was just confused, and I always, you know, been told where to go, trying to stay alive, and my men I took care of, and now I had to go back, and they expected me to get up and probably get a job right away. And so I got back to Syracuse, and we stayed in a hotel room for 2 weeks before he called my grandmother. He said it took him, you know, over a year before he actually felt kind of normal again. So this is something that I would say they sent to all the officers. It's got the White House seal on it. It says, Richard P. Leonard, to you who answered the call of your country and served in its armed forces to bring about the total defeat of the enemy, I extend the heartfelt thanks to a grateful nation. As one of the nation's finest, you undertook the most severe task one can be called upon to perform. Because you demonstrated the fortitude, resourcefulness, and calm judgment necessary to carry out that task, we now look to you for leadership and example in further exalting our country in peace. Harry Truman. Now I found this in a magazine article about 1990. So it was in the New Republic, maybe 1985, I don't know. But it struck me. These are B-24s in Fort Worth, Texas, a factory. And this kind of sums up the whole scenario of that generation for me. It says 75 years ago our freedom was on the line. I changed it. It was 45 when I read it. On the front line, on the production line, because in Europe and the Pacific, America's fighting forces needed a new, longer-range heavy bomber. And on our assembly lines in Fort Worth and San Diego, and on others across the country, America's working forces responded. At the peak of production in Fort Worth, more than 30,000 workers toiling around the clock were building a new B-24 every 4 hours. Now we are helping to build one more by making a grant to help restore one of our B-24s to its original condition. Soon a B-24 Liberator, which first flew in the Pacific, will fly again, this time in air shows across the country. Not as a symbol of American might or of American manufacturing muscle, but of the American spirit, which makes them both possible. So I thought that was pretty appropriate. Maybe a little choked up. Just one more thing which is kind of interesting. This was my grandmother on my mother's side. Eleanor Henchy McGivney. That's my mother and Rick. Well, Rick was killed. He was in the infantry. He was killed in Germany about 2 months before Germany surrendered. This is a picture of him. Well, my grandmother gets the letter. I don't know if I can make it through this one, but I'll try. This is the letter they sent. Dear Mrs. McGivney, may I express to you the deepest sympathies of the officers and men of this organization in your bereavement caused by the death of your son, Richard, who was killed in action in Germany on January 21st, 1945. Richard was a rifleman in the 1st Platoon, Company A, 301st Infantry, which was to capture a heavily fortified position of the enemy along with other members of his battalion. During the attack, the battalion was heavily fired upon by enemy artillery and mortar fire. It was during this action that your son Richard was killed instantly. He died without mental or physical suffering. Your son was a good soldier and was highly esteemed by his officers and comrades. His sacrifice was unselfishly made for the protection and well-being of those who he loved at home and for his country. We read in the Bible, greater love hath no man than a man that laid down his life for his friends. I know that mere words can bring little comfort to you in your bereavement. However, I want you to know that Richard's conspicuous courage and heroic determination are in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and live on as constant inspiration to his comrades. May the God of all grace comfort and sustain you is our prayer. You know, she wanted to know where he was killed and did he get a Christian burial. She had no information on that, which is understandable because it was the end of the war. There's probably thousands of men that were missing or killed. So she contacted her congressman down in Albany. Now this is a woman that grew up in Gorham, New Hampshire. Met my grandfather. He grew up in Gorham, got married, moved to Fulton, New York, never went anywhere. She worked in the Hershey's chocolate factory. Probably never went on vacation, had 6 kids. So she goes to Albany, takes a bus to Albany, talks to her legislator, he can't help her. So then she takes a train to New York City to the 301st Infantry headquarters and goes there and meets with them. They can't help her. So now she starts a letter writing campaign. She wrote a letter every day for a year to the office of the Quartermaster General and the office of the Quartermaster General in Washington, D.C. Every day she wrote a letter. Finally, on May 23rd, 1946, she got this letter back. Dear Mrs. McGivney, your letter to the Adjutant General concerning your son, the late Private Richard G. McGivney, Jr. has been referred to this office. The official report of the burial discloses that the remains of your son are interred in plot EE, row 1, grave 16, in the United States Military Cemetery, Hamm, Luxembourg, Germany, located approximately 2 miles east of the city of Luxembourg. A copy of your letter is being forwarded to the Chief of Chaplains, Washington, D.C. for information as to the name of the chaplain who officiated in the burial services of your son. Please accept my sincere sympathy for your loss of your son, Quartermaster German. This is a cemetery in Germany, which my sister went over and found his gravesite. Okay, now this is from the Office of the Chief of Chaplains, May 31st, 1946. Dear Mrs. McGivney, reference is made to your letter of recent date, a copy of which has been forwarded to this office by the Quartermaster General, in which you request information concerning your son, Private First Class Richard McGivney. The records of this office show that Chaplain Edward T. O'Neill, a Catholic priest, held a funeral service for your son. You may thus be assured that the appropriate religious rites and military service were held for him, and that his grave is properly marked. If you should care to write to Chaplain O'Neill, you may do so addressing your letter to as follows. It may be that he will be able to give you further information and is available at this time at this office. The Chief of Services desires that I express to you his sympathy and sorrow. So that's a good example as well as of what that whole time period was about. People weren't afraid to stand up and do what they thought was right. They weren't afraid to die for what they thought was right. These are letters that my father wrote home during the war, and my grandmother saved them all in the book when he's talking about different places. There are letters in there. This is him. I think he was about 76, 77. So, that kind of sums it up. Anybody have any questions? I'd be glad to answer. Thank you for being so attentive.
Thank you for giving us all that information.
If you'd like a book, if you have an autograph, one for you, for $20.
Now you're tired.
Getting old.
That's also
Old in the crowd.
Yeah, this is Bill's Father's Day present.
Now we're going.
I'll keep an eye on the traffic.
All right. Well, thanks for coming today. My name's Dave Leonard, and I lived in Lyon Mountain for about 11 years.
Oh.
Up on top of the hill here. Taught school in Northern Adirondack in the 70s. Got a couple of my students here today, which is nice. And I want to thank Anna and Anne-Marie and the board for inviting me here today to do this. And I'm kind of ashamed to say that I've never been in here before.
You were here yesterday.
What a fantastic job you've done here preserving the history of this town and the people in it. It's just all done so tastefully. I was going to light the cigar for that guy sitting at the desk yesterday. So